How to Train Your Dragon is about a village of Vikings that for hundreds of years have seen dragons as their enemy. But there is a kid in the village. He's trying desperately to fit in, and he figures the way to fit in would be to kill a dragon. So he attempts to kill a dragon, doesn't quite kill the dragon, gets to know the dragon when he finds him wounded in the forest, and finds out that dragons are not really the Vikings' main enemy after all. I was first interviewed to work on How to Train Your Dragon 3 years before the movie is coming out. I told them in that first meeting that I wanted to get really involved as early as possible, not continuously, but occasionally producing kind of speculative sounds which I could give to the animators. They loved that idea, and that's what happened. I would invent some sounds that I thought might be interesting dragon sounds, send those to the animators. They would get inspired by some of those sounds at least, and do some animations which they would send to me, at least in rough form. That would give me more ideas, then I'd send more detailed speculative sounds back to them, and it was that kind of feedback process all the way through. One of the great things about working on this movie was that we had such a huge variety of dragons to invent sounds for. Very often when we work on a film that has dinosaurs or dragons or creatures like that, they all tend to look the same, and they all tend to vocalize in more or less the same way. And these filmmakers, the people who were making How to Train Your Dragon, told me from the very beginning they don't want to do that. They want to make the dragons more diverse. You got all kinds of dragons, big ones, small ones, and they want them to vocalize in each their own distinct way. Certainly, Toothless was the biggest challenge for us in terms of the vocalizations, because he had to have so much variety just within his own voice. Mostly a combination of my voice and elephants and horses. Maybe a tiger here and there. It's lots of stuff. And very often what you get from an animal is obviously exotic in a way that a human voice can't do. On the other hand, you get a kind of sympathetic note, or you can get sympathetic notes from human vocalizations that you can't get from animals. When Toothless is eating the fish, it was fun to play with the variety of sounds that he needed to make. We did want him to purr a little bit, almost like a cat, and we certainly used cat elements in the purring, but I purred a little bit also. The mouth sounds that Toothless made were very important in that sequence. Not only literally the eating sounds, but also sort of smacking in between taking bites, because it really makes those moments a lot more believable.
Not so fireproof on the inside, are you? There you go. Everything we know about you guys is wrong.
When Hiccup is trying to attach his new prosthetic tail fin to Toothless, the Foley is very important. And we needed a sound for that tail moving back and forth that was big enough to be believable as this thing that's supposed to be, bigger than a horse.
Okay. It's not too bad. It works. Whoa! No! Oh my God! It's working! Yes! Yes! I did it!
One of our trademarks at Skywalker Sound is to break down some of the traditional barriers between sound editing or sound design on the one hand and sound mixing on the other. So we encourage sound editors to think like mixers, and we encourage mixers to also get practice thinking like sound editors. I guess the biggest lesson to learn if you're a sound editor or a sound designer and you want to begin to think a little bit like a mixer is to think in terms of making choices. We could, for instance, have just come up with hundreds of alternatives, or at least scores of alternatives, for virtually every sound in the movie, and thought, well, okay, we'll work it all out in our final mix and decide there. But we encourage sound editors to make choices, to come up with the best set of sounds to their ear, present that in the mix, and more often than not, we find that that approach works, and that's certainly the way we did it on How to Train Your Dragon. I'm probably most proud of the teamwork on How to Train Your Dragon, combined with the fact of getting involved so early on the movie and working on it over a period of almost 3 years. It's a model of how I would often like to work on movies. It doesn't mean that somebody who's the sound person has to work every day on the film for 3 years, but early involvement of one kind or another is very often what makes the track really cool.